think we'll go ahead and get started in the interest of time. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is George Maldonado. I'm an associate planner with our city planning division here at Tustin. Joining us as well is our principal planner, Raymond Berrigan, and our executive secretary, Vera Hurtado. So this Zoom webinar is an informational session regarding the City of Tustin's newly updated outdoor dining regulations that went into effect on October 21st of this year. While everyone is welcome to attend or view this webinar, as it will be recorded, today's session is more geared towards businesses who have a temporary outdoor dining space that needs to be transitioned by the end of this year. So if there are any questions, we'll have some time at the end of the presentation. But again, the webinar will be recorded and can be viewed at a later time. Some brief background on outdoor dining efforts in Tustin. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic brought some very difficult times for us all, both personally and for our business community. So here's a quick summary of some of our efforts in response to that. So in June of 2020, the City Council established the temporary outdoor dining program, which allowed businesses to set up temporary outdoor spaces in response to, at the time, the rapidly evolving mandates and restrictions on indoor operations. So this program is what allowed many of our restaurants to set up temporary outdoor spaces that may still be up to this day. A year later, in November of 2021, the planning division, my team, launched a survey to better understand resident and business needs and experiences as they relate to visiting or operating a temporary outdoor dining space. And this survey spanned until January 2022, and we got more than 1,400 respondents. So the insights from the survey is what allowed us to craft the updated regulations that were accepted by the Planning Commission in July of this year, and later the City Council in August. So as I mentioned, the new regulations, they went into effect officially on October 21st, with the idea that businesses would transition their temporary outdoor dining areas by the end of this year, by December 31st. The updated regulations were designed with flexibility and streamlining in mind. So they created 3 options for food establishments to provide outdoor dining. And I'll go into more detail on each of these in the upcoming slides, but briefly, these categories include outdoor seating areas, which are just portable chairs, tables, and other furniture outside of any parking areas or required paths for pedestrians. So that's outdoor seating areas. We have outdoor dining areas, which those are what previously you might consider more as traditional outdoor dining. So things like permanently improved outdoor dining patios where they're well-defined. You can visually identify them as being an extension of the restaurant, and they usually have fencing or some sort of landscape planter and improved flooring. So we'll go into detail on that. And lastly, the third option would be either of these 2 options that I just talked about, but on public property. So on a public sidewalk, public street, etc. So first up, let's talk about outdoor seating areas. So as I mentioned, that's just tables and chairs, other furniture. There's no construction, no fencing. This would be set up outside of the way of any cars or of any pedestrian paths. So as you can see on the image here to the right, I believe this is Keen Coffee right across the street from City Hall. They usually set up some tables and chairs along their frontage, and you can see that it's outside of the way of the sidewalk there. It's not in the middle of the sidewalk. It's not in the middle of the drive aisle. It's just tables and chairs within the shopping center, within the private property. So this is what we would consider an example of an outdoor seating area. No alcohol can be served in these areas, and they are subject to other operational requirements. For example, they can be set up when the business opens, and they have to be put back in shortly after the business closes, or no later than 11 p.m. if it's a shopping center, or if they're near any residential, then the latest that it can be out is 10 p.m. And other operational requirements that are in the ordinance. So if a business can operate their outdoor seating area in compliance with those operating requirements, then there is no submittal or review on the city's end. We don't have to approve anything necessarily for businesses to operate this type of outdoor seating. You can just do it in compliance with these operational requirements that are in the code. Next up are outdoor dining areas. So this is, like I mentioned, kind of what you would imagine as a more traditional outdoor dining space, an outdoor patio. This example is Centro here in Old Town. As you can see, they have a very clearly defined permanent outdoor dining area that's bordered by some permanent fencing there, the wall. They've got some enhanced flooring there. I believe it looks like it's brick. And it's very clearly an extension of the restaurant. It's controlled by the restaurant. Doesn't necessarily have to look like this exactly. Towards the later in the presentation, we'll get into some other ways that this can look, but in essence, it's a permanent expansion of the restaurant, of their outdoor dining space that's enclosed, that's secure, and that is attractive. The review process for this type of outdoor dining, this would ultimately require that you obtain building permits, and prior to that, you'd have to go through what's called design review. So this is, you would require more professional sort of plans showing us your proposal, not only what it's going to look like, but also demonstrating compliance with all of the other codes and requirements that are out there for any type of construction. So things like the building code, fire code, and things of that nature. And lastly, third, is outdoor dining in the public right-of-way. So as I mentioned, this is either of the two categories that I just spoke about, but in the public right-of-way on public property. So things like public sidewalks, streets, curbside, etc. So for this type of outdoor dining, in addition to the requirements for that specific type of outdoor dining, so for example, up top, the picture on the top right, I believe that's El Camino Cafe. That you can see that they have a well-defined, secured outdoor dining area, their own little patio there that's very visibly defined as an extension of their restaurant. So that would be an outdoor dining area. In addition to the requirements for that category, there are other requirements having to do with construction or the use of public property. Namely, you would need to obtain what's called a license agreement from the city for use of public right-of-way. Now, this is true both for permanent construction, like for the example with El Camino Cafe. This is also true for just tables and chairs on public property. So on the bottom picture is in front of American Grub, also in Old Town. You can see that they have just some tables and chairs out on the sidewalk. Normally, we would consider that an outdoor seating area because it's just tables and chairs. There's no construction, no fencing. If this were on private property, there would be no city review that's required, but because it's on the public sidewalk, city review is required. The business would need to obtain a license agreement in order to continue using the public sidewalk in this way, even though there's no fencing or construction, even though it's just tables and chairs, we would still need a license agreement. So in the example above with El Camino Cafe, not only would they go through design review, but as part of that process, they'd obtain a license agreement. And in the picture below, there would be no design review, it's just the license agreement process. So more flexibility was built into the updated code by providing relief from parking requirements. So additional parking is not required for the permanently expanded areas, the outdoor dining areas, if they have no more than 15 seats. So that's up from 12 seats in the previous code. So now you can have up to 15 seats and not require any parking. We also built in a section for large retail centers. So think centers like the marketplace, the district, etc. Restaurants within large retail centers can use up to 3 parking spaces to build a permanent outdoor dining area, so that permanent expansion, without needing to replace those parking spaces. So in other words, restaurants in large retail centers can use up 3 parking spaces to build an outdoor dining patio without needing to replace those spaces elsewhere. Now, it should also be noted that additional parking reductions can be requested both for restaurants in large retail centers as well as in other smaller commercial properties by other means, such as requesting a conditional use permit for joint use parking, or by securing parking spaces on other properties within 500 feet of the restaurant. So there are other avenues that are just already part of the regular municipal code, but I just discussed a few of the ones that we updated and where we built in some more flexibility. And lastly, as I mentioned, we eliminated any type of review required for outdoor seating areas, which again is just tables and chairs, no construction or fencing on private property. So subject to meeting the operational requirements. So this was a brief overview on the updated regulations. Now I would like to discuss examples of how you can transition your temporary outdoor dining space per the new rules. Of course, this is going to be a very general sort of discussion, so we encourage businesses to set up a one-on-one consultation with the city planner to discuss the specific property that you have, the specific circumstances, and what pathways you might have available. So I'll provide some information towards the end of the presentation on how to set up that consultation. So example number 1. Our first example is going to be a restaurant that has a temporary tent in the parking lot that they use for outdoor dining. So we'll discuss a couple options for how this type of temporary setup can be transitioned to comply with the updated rules. So in this example, the tent is on private property and dining occurs over parking spaces. As you can see, it is bordered by some plants and other means to create a space that they can visually identify as being an extension of the restaurant. So this is a very common example that we see throughout our shopping centers here in Tustin. So how can this business move forward to comply with the updated regulations? What next steps are there to transition this per the new rules? Well, they might have a couple options depending on their intent. So if the restaurant wants to continue using this particular space, so this parking lot, using up these parking spaces, if they want to continue using it for outdoor dining, they would need to turn it into a formal permanent outdoor dining area. Now this would include providing permanent decking or flooring to differentiate it from the asphalt so that people are not just dining on on the concrete there, like literally above the parking spaces. The business would also need to provide some permanent fencing so that patrons are secure from nearby vehicle traffic. The outdoor dining area would require these improvements, as well as meeting, as I mentioned, just other applicable code requirements, such as from the building code, fire code, relating to accessibility, etc. So this next slide coming up here is going to show what that can look like. So as you can see, this is an example of a permanent outdoor dining area. It's a formal expansion of the restaurant into the parking lot. Customers are secured by a wall and a landscape planter, and they're no longer dining on the asphalt. You can't see it, but you can imagine that behind the little wall there and the landscape planter that they have some enhanced flooring material, something like maybe hardwood or brick or whatever the case may be. And in this picture, you can even see that they have a patio cover that further serves to identify this space as part of the restaurant, although the patio cover isn't necessarily required, but you can see how that works in this example here. So this type of project would require that you first go through design review prior to obtaining building permits, which would include submitting conceptual plans of the outdoor dining area and the restaurant for review. So at that time, we would review the architecture, the concept. We would look for renderings such as this, showing us what it's going to look like, as well as plans that show us the layout of the dining space, of how it's going to meet the various requirements, etc. So this is option one. If the intent, again, is to use that same space, and I'll go back a slide here, to use the same exact space, these parking spaces for outdoor dining, we'd have to turn it into something like this, something permanent, something secure, and that is architecturally compatible with the restaurant, with the building. Now, option two would be something like this, going back to the Keen's example. Would be, instead of having the tent in the parking lot, it would be to provide an outdoor seating area, which again is just tables and chairs and other types of movable temporary furniture that's meant to be outdoors, of course, that can withstand the elements and be cleaned. That would be option two, an outdoor seating area. So again, that does not include any construction, does not include any fencing. It is simply furniture that is outside of the way of any vehicles, of any parking spaces, of any required pedestrian paths, cannot have any advertisement or branding of any sort, and it's got to be kept in good condition. For something like this, there is no review required from the city, as in this example, that would be a private property. So no review required or approval on our end, as long as the area is well maintained and it's operating in compliance with the operational requirements in the updated regulations. So now moving on to example number two. So this is now a completely different example than what we just discussed. In this example, we're going to be discussing a restaurant that has outdoor seating, so just tables and chairs out on the public sidewalk. So in this example, let's say the restaurant obtained approval, a temporary use permit, a TUP, to provide this type of outdoor seating in the public right-of-way. In this example, you can see it's just tables and chairs, it's on the sidewalk, it's not in the way of walking paths for pedestrians. How would they be able to transition this to comply with the new regulations? Well, As I mentioned before, typically outdoor seating areas would not require city review if they were on private property. They do require city review and approval if they are on public property. As I mentioned, they would need to obtain a license agreement. So this requirement for a license agreement was temporarily suspended as part of the temporary outdoor dining program. So we issued a lot of temporary use permits for this type of setup without needing to obtain a license agreement. But that program is currently scheduled to expire on December 31st. So if you were approved for something like this, you will need to obtain a license agreement by the end of the year. So to process the license agreement, we need a plan showing us the location and layout of the proposed seating. We would need a description of how you're going to operate in that space. So a written narrative describing the number of chairs, number of tables, when it's going to be set up, etc. And we would also need some liability insurance that meets the city's requirements. Chances are you've already submitted most of this information when you applied for a temporary use permit. If you set up a personal consultation with a city planner, we can see what information we already have on file, and if you would even need anything to provide anything further to process the license agreement. So setting up that personal one-on-one consultation would be key. Either way, you would need to initiate that conversation with us. So let's say you do have all of the information that we would require to process the license agreement. We would still need you to reach out to tell us that you would want us to do so. So setting up that consultation is key. So again, just to recap, in this example, it is just outdoor seating. It's not a permanent expansion of the restaurant. We're not building anything. It's just tables and chairs. So all you would need is a license agreement from the city. So this leads me to our last slide. Our website is full of a lot of helpful resources. That website being www.tustinca.org/outdoor dining. We have a section with answers to frequently asked questions, as well as a link to the updated regulations, which is ordinance number 1526. Those are the updated regulations. If you obtained approval for a temporary outdoor dining space during the height of the pandemic, you should have also received a letter in the mail with a physical copy of the updated rules, as well as a few other flyers that kind of briefly summarize these options that we discussed in a little bit more detail today. Of course, city planning staff are happy to guide you through these updated rules one-on-one as they relate to your specific property and situation. So you can call us or email us to set up that consultation. And we have some contact information there. Our email is tustinplanning@tustinca.org. And our public line is 714-573-3140. You can call us or email us to set up that consultation, or you're welcome to stop by the public counter during our business hours. So that's Monday through Thursday from 7:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. and on Fridays from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So that concludes my presentation. We have a little bit of time if there are any questions from the participants, any general questions based off of the new rules, keeping in mind that we are scheduling those one-on-ones to discuss specifics related to specific restaurants and situations. So at this time, I will ask Vera if there are any questions or hands raised in the audience.
George, there are no.
Okay, so sounds like there are no questions in the audience at this time. So we will go ahead and conclude the webinar at this time. So we'll stop the recording, but again, staff is more than happy to chat with you on the phone, meet with you at the counter, or correspond through email to have that consultation with you. And thank you for choosing Tustin as your place of business. Thank you everyone for attending.